And so last night I get this call, and this is the second time these people call, and this is such a boomer thing for me. Sorry, boomers, but if so, I grew up in a small town, and if someone calls your phone, you answer the phone, and it might be a scammer, it might be whatever, but you got a phone, you answer the phone, right? And so you don't know who it is. In fact, someone from the East Coast called to pray for this podcast yesterday, left me a message because I couldn't get to the phone. You always answer the phone. You never know who it's going to be. And so I get this call. It's someone calling, and they're like, hey, I'm calling from whatever asset management something, right? And it's always some official sounding name. And they're like, I see that you always pay your credit cards on time, and I have a deal for you. And I'm like, oh, what credit cards? Well, I don't, just all your credit cards. I'm like, oh, well, where did you get information that I have credit cards? Well, from our marketing team. Your marketing team was digging up information on my credit cards? Well, yes, we have connections with all the other banks and financial institutions and credit card companies. And so what I want to talk to you about is, no, wait, well, hold on. How did your marketing team get this stuff? Well, they just got this stuff. I said, okay, well, I'm not moving forward until you tell me what credit cards and where you got the information. So little does he know, I don't have any credit cards. And there's nothing he could be talking about. The only credit that I have in my name is my utilities, right? So I'm sorry, scammers, I probably just gave you too much information. Now you're going to go hack my utilities bill, right? But I just don't do that. So he's talking about nothing with me. And so I know he's scamming. So I'm just trying to get him all the way out over his skis. And eventually I get a little annoyed with him. And I'm like, all right, dude, I don't have any credit cards. This is a total scam. I'm going to, let you go. What's funny is the time they called before, it was the same routine. And I did the same thing with him. And the lady got mad at me. Because she's like, I'm trying to do a good thing for you, and it's a waste of my time if you're going to, if you're going to waste my time, whatever. She thought I was wasting her time, but I'm serious. Man, if there are credit cards in my name, I want to know because I didn't sign up for them. So tell me where you got the information. Anyway, it's such a boomer thing, answer all the calls. Look, yesterday, I didn't land a point the way that I wanted to land a point. And the beauty of having a podcast where I get to come back the next day is you get to hear me land the point the way I wanted to land the point. Look, I was talking about people you don't have conversations with. And you don't have conversations with people who are not going to have honest conversations, right? And so they're going to tell you things without ever really telling you things. Just like the scammer on the phone. Well, what credit cards? Well, we got it from our marketing department. Well, where'd they get it? Well, they got it from banks. Let's just move on. No. We're not moving on. You got to tell me where you got the information because I want to have an understanding of what you're saying. And if people won't do that with you, it's probably not an honest conversation. And you don't want to have conversations where they're making you have a conversation based on their definition of terms. Right? So that's why we read that bit from Mortimer J. Adler's How to Read a Book from the 1940s. Coming to terms, understanding what the terms they're using actually mean so that we're not supplanting equality with equity and trying to suggest that what we always meant by equality is what we mean now by equity. It's fine if we have an argument for one or the other, but we don't want to shoehorn concepts into each other and play word games to wind up being right. So those are just some things to watch out. Coming to terms is also a both of us thing, right? So when you're having a conversation, it's not the other person gets to define all the terms and gets to set all the rules for the conversations. In fact, if you know you're talking to a Marxist, never let them define the terms because they're never going to define terms in the common way. The whole premise is a game of language. I had a friend who said, oh, you don't like socialism. Well, we pay for our streets. That's socialism. And I'm like, no, that's actually not socialism. But if you can shoehorn one concept into the other, then you can get the ball rolling before, you get down the road. All right. So look, here's what's on the show today. We're going to talk a lot about what we're going to talk about today And what we're trying to major on this week is the why. So what's the impact of this stuff? I keep talking about all this theory stuff and how do we have conversations? And that's a bit of an esoteric conversation. How do we look at our Bible? Why do we need to change? And I want to put some skin on that today. And so we can kind of see what some of the effects are when we don't have a pathway to change, when we're not trying to answer the question of Jesus the same way, and when we don't have great conversations. In fact, when we even criminalize the conversation to some degree, or we let people have the conversation and say, well, who cares about the answer? Just go on your quest. So we're going to talk about those things and how they affect us, how the things that I've been saying have a real tangible effect to the people around us, and why it's our responsibility to do a little better to help build people's faith up. And that's what we do every day, right? We're just trying to build our faith up. We're trying to lean in together and find more Jesus in more places we agree about Jesus and live like Jesus together. So what are we going to do today? Same thing we do every day. Try and live like Jesus together. Take it away, Chuck.
And being willing to be less than the least became the greatest of all. Let us imitate him who was King of kings and yet a servant of servants.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
Would you turn on my microphone, please?
It's right here in the hall closet.
All right, so I can't help but play this clip, this media clip from YouTube today, because, and maybe this might be a little too partisan to me. Sorry, my machine froze up here. There we go. Catch up. This might be a little partisan to me. I live in California, and those of us who are generally conservative in California, we consider ourselves a little bit like tax cattle because we really don't have any representation. They're going to say, we're going to take your money, and we're going to say, oh, okay. So anyway, this is from 2013, and I don't really advocate for the methodology of Adam Carolla here, but this is Gavin Newsom and Adam Carolla having a conversation. And this is a great example of the principle that I was just talking about. Oh, hold on. Let's go back and do that where we can hear it.
I want everybody to plan. Look down the road 6 months. Yes, your husband lost his job. That's why you need to sock away some money when he's gainfully employed. Yes, they foreclosed on your home. That's why you need to have a network, a community, right. Friends, family members, money put away.
But think about
Don't
Adam,
have the kids.
Half of African Americans in the state of California, roughly half of Latino families, have no access to a checking account or an ATM. Things we take for granted. They don't have a checking account.
What's wrong with them?
And well, because they don't have the resources to sock those things away.
Why do we have them?
A lot of different reasons, but roughly half those families don't. And where do they
why
end
do
up?
Armenians have them?
But where they end up is in check cashing places.
But I want to know why those groups. Why
those
two groups don't have access?
Well, a lot of it just happens to be that we can talk
they're
about.
Flawed?
This. No, they're hardly flawed, but they're struggling.
Genetically
Folks are making
flawed.
their word. Hardly, not absolutely.
But okay,
not.
Do Asians have this problem?
I mean, a lot of communities have. A lot of whites have these problems.
Oh,
but
so that's not just black and Hispanic.
No, but
why did you bring up black and Hispanic?
Because the magnitude is ominous.
But why so many of them?
It just happens to be the magnitude.
That's the way God planned it?
Not at all.
Well, what happened to them?
There are a lot of issues, and that the communities are struggling. A lot
why
of new
are they
immigrants.
Struggling?
A lot of different reasons. Lack of
Hispanics
opportunity.
Have been here. Blacks have been here longer than we've been here.
So anyway, he goes on and on and on. And the point is, and I know that's, you're getting a politician being a politician. Gavin Newsom does not want to say the real issue, right? He doesn't want to talk about the core issues. Is there an education issue? Is there a job training issue? Well, then maybe we need to go in with education programs and job training programs. So that's not what governments want to do. Governments want to go in with welfare and support programs and aid programs like that so that they can actually do things without doing things, right? And they can allocate some funds and say, look at what I did, create a voting block. And that's not just on the left. There are people on the right who do that kind of thing, create a voting block. But it's the same kind of conversation. Now listen, in your one-on-one conversations, don't be like Adam Carolla there. If you happen to find yourself on a radio show or something, you might need to be a little bit aggressive, and I'm still not saying that's the right way to do it, but you're not having a conversation. When you're in a public forum and you've got many people watching you in a presentational sense, that conversation is not so that you can convince the person you're talking to. It's so that you can inform the people of your perspective who are watching the conversation. And that's kind of what's going on here. We need to have better conversations than that interpersonally. But it's kind of funny because getting a politician to actually have, but what do you mean by that? But point to that specifically. Well, there's various disparities of various things, of various, and then they're just trying to say the rhetoric. That's pretty much what I went through with the credit card guy, right? And it's the salesman trick. So I learned this trick. Okay, I've worked in churches most of my adult life, predominantly one church, because I believe in sticking with people. And, it's funny, people kept trying to hire me away from the church I was in and to a bigger place. And I kept asking them a question like, well, why are the people at your church more in need of me than the people at my church? They're listening to me and they hear me when I communicate and I'm serving them and I'm ministering to them and they respect me for it. Why don't they deserve my effort and work? And well, because this is a real opportunity for your life. I'm like, okay, but I'm not really in ministry for the life opportunity. I'm in it for the loving of people things. But anyway, whatever. So I always had to work, and like most of your pastors and most anyone you know in ministry, at least for a significant portion of their time, have had to do 2 or 3 jobs to get things done. So one of the jobs I worked, long story longer, was sales. And I worked a lot of sales, and I'm a musician, so I worked in a lot of music store kind of environments. And I worked with this one guy, and he was great. He was a great guy. But we have the music stand trick, and we couldn't keep these products on the shelves. When we employed this tactic, we couldn't keep these products on the shelves, and I wasn't necessarily thrilled about it. I never really bought into exactly how on this, but we had terrible stand. We had music stands. People come in, I need a music stand. My music teacher said I need a music stand. Well, okay, we got this portable one right here. It's $9.99, and it was wiry, and you'd pick it up and it'd fall apart. And sometimes the salesman, he would kind of put his foot on the base a little bit so that when he picked it up, the thing would actually fall apart. And then he would, okay, now look over here. We got this really nice one, because that one's a little, it's fine, but it is what it is. It's a $10 stand. But look over here, there's a $50 Manhasset stand. It's all sturdy with bolts and metal and the things. It's the kind you see in an orchestra. But you're not going to put that in your backpack, are you? No. Well, let me show you just right. This is the Goldilocks music stand. We wouldn't say that, but it's the one in the middle. It's portable, but it also has a real firm back for your music. So your music's not going to fly off in the wind and all the things. And we couldn't keep those things in stock because you got terrible, you got overcomplicated, you got just right. But this is also what they do on the news, right? They say, extremism on both sides, that's why thing I want you to believe. Right? And this is also what they do if you haven't read a bunch of biblical commentaries. This is what they do in biblical commentaries when they come across a controversial topic. They go, well, here's a really bad way to look at it. And obviously, we all know that's not it. Here's a way that kind of works, but it might be a little overcomplicated. And I'm not even going to answer, but I'm just going to give you, here's a framework where most people see it. And it's funny, that framework always tends to be wherever pop culture is at the time in Christianity. So that kind of nice little Goldilocks zone just happens to be, 500 years ago what most Christians were thinking, or 300 years ago what most Christians were thinking, and it just gets a little bit ridiculous. So here's one idea with holes, here's another idea that's overdone, too complicated, and here's just right, which is magically the view that everyone holds. So what does this have to do with what we're going to talk about today? Goldilocks and the sales thing, and I'm pitching you an idea, but I'm never really getting to the bottom of it. What's the point? So I'm going to tell you what the point is here, and then we're going to look at some examples, and I just want to warn you that this might get a little heavy. And I haven't vetted everything in here for language, and I hope as a fellow follower of Jesus, you're okay with that. I don't condone swearing, but I'm not necessarily going to run around and try and edit every other person as I'm trying to hear and understand and love people. So hang tight if there happens to be a term here and there. I don't think there is, but, stick with me. But this is what evil is doing in our society right now. And it's also doing it in the church. It's doing the Goldilocks game. Well, look, this didn't work. And this is really overcomplicated. Why don't you just do this? And so you go to one church and they see questions as spiritual weakness, right? And this is the terrible music stand. And so what they want you to do is pray away the questions. They don't want to answer the questions. They just want you to pray them away. Well, then you go to other churches and they have room for the questions. But what they're really doing is asking you to self-report your bugs so that they can debug you. Oh, I've got another bug report. And so I'm going to straighten you out with overcomplicated gibberish. And I'm just going to keep shoving these overcomplicated gibberish ideas that don't really make sense of ancient literature. And I'm going to keep, and then you come back and report if you have another bug. And then I'm going to patch it with more circular reasoning. And then you have another bug. And then I'm going to come back and add more apologetics. And then another. And so then and we get further and further away from understanding our scriptures and understanding the Bible. And it just becomes about silencing the bug and stopping the bug report, right? And that's not working either. So we know we don't want to pray it away, and we don't want anyone to fix us with a bunch of nonsense. And here comes liberal progressivism. And, they're telling us that, listen, man, just go on this kind of deconstruction journey or don't worry about your faith and just follow wherever the Spirit leads. And it doesn't matter if it's an uppercase S in the Spirit or a lowercase s in the Spirit, whatever, wherever that takes you. If that's a journey that's right for you, then that's good. And so, and even if that's a journey right on out of your faith, don't be afraid. It gets really sad. And I want to play a clip from someone, and you guys, if you're in evangelicalism, you may know this person. You may be familiar with this. John Piper is someone I really respect. And I don't know what happened to his son. I just stumbled upon this clip as I was prepping for this show. But I know it's got to be a punch in the gut to his dad. And so this is kind of the ideology that you get. This is the Goldilocks music stand, right? And there's a certain sort of sense to it. So let's watch this real quick.
Do you feel pressure to explain yourself? Because you don't have to. Whatever you might have heard, you don't have to be prepared to give a reason. Have you ever felt obligated to explain why you're not Zoroastrian? I doubt it. Sure, you could go on Wikipedia for a few minutes and come up with reasons, but the fact you haven't already done that for every religion in the world shows you know you don't have to. Have you even heard of Antoinism, Ratana, Eastern Lightning? I hadn't. So how do we know they're not true? We don't. But you're not stressed because we all innately know you don't have to address a religion's claims before dismissing them. If you feel, in your heart, no obligation to explain why you're not Hindu, you can give yourself the same freedom, the same non-obligation when it comes to Christianity. So you've stopped believing. You can just do that. I mean, you're not really doing anything. Belief isn't something we do. It's something we notice. If you no longer accept fundamentalism, you're observing that within yourself. And that is a kind of freedom, to just notice it, watch it, accept it. This is happening to you. You don't have to defend what you're not doing. And the truth of who you are is not made truthier by explaining it. If doing some kind of reverse apologetics feels good, do it. But it's not a requirement. You don't need to have a compelling why I'm not a Christian anymore presentation. This is not a meeting. It's not homework. Personally, I did not think my way out. I felt my way out. I had fear and torment. I wanted peace and comfort. And that is an entire explanation. Is it working? I guess we'll see. Come on if you feel.
Right? And he invites people along. And this is where this whole idea of, walking away from a faith that doesn't have answers anymore. So, and I don't want to be, I'm not trying to say something about John Piper or his church or his faith experience here. I don't know. I don't go there. I don't know the man personally. And I don't like to judge people from 1,000 miles away. But I'm sure that what his son is going through breaks his heart, and it breaks my heart for him. And I pray for him and his family. My heart goes out to him. However, this is what happens when we get rigid and we don't learn to change together. When we build our faith community around our conclusions and conclusions from imperfect people, then those imperfect conclusions, we can't always see the flaw in them, but someone else feels the flaw because it's not fully Jesus. It's just almost Jesus. And when we don't have a way to change and continue to grow as followers of Jesus, when we haven't mapped out a path of how we can continue to lean into God's transformational work in our life without losing our mind, without losing our faith, and without losing our way, when we don't have a path or a plan for that, then we hold on to the rigid conclusions. And people feel the consequences. So, I don't mean to bum you out this morning, but as we look at some examples, think about this. Once we start building doctrines and walls and apologetics for the things that we believe, instead of hearing a reasonable critique and going, let me go look at that, then we paint ourselves into a corner of our own imperfect conclusions. And then we start to realize that the place where we stand, where we've painted ourselves into this corner, is actually maybe further and not closer to Jesus. Because things that are not malleable in God's hands get broken. So be the clay, not the pot, right? Be the clay, not the pot. And this is why we need a pathway to change together. If in 5 years I'm still doing this podcast, I will be telling you about things that I have changed my mind about. Why? Because doing this podcast opens you up to my own personal journey, right? I'm trying to be transparent here. Even though I work hard to make sure that what I'm telling you is followable and it's engaging and that you enjoy listening, I'm really just sharing who I am and what I'm about. And this is my own personal journey. And so I'm going to change, and I'm proud of that. And sometimes I'll wander off and come back in this way and that way because I'm not a perfect person. But it won't take you long to notice that I'm changing. But here's where we often go wrong. There's this thing going around called deconstruction, and it's an old concept. People have been doing this for 15 years. And it became vogue, and then it became something that was cool to criticize. And then the people who are doing deconstruction are like, ooh, I'm not doing deconstruction anymore. It's kind of like the 6-7 thing with my kid. When I do that, he's like, ugh, Dad. Because parents started doing it, and that got rid of it. And so, that's our secret weapon. You want the fad to go, just start doing what your kids are doing, and it's gone. But that's kind of where deconstructionists are. It's not that they're not doing deconstruction. They're just calling it something different. And so think about it like this. It's not that there are no problems. That's where we go wrong. Someone will come along and say, hey, I think that's a problem. And our response to that is, you're attacking the faith, instead of, that's an interesting question. And then try and lean in and listen and understand. And so because we don't have a way to handle the problem, imagine you're driving your car down the road and there's a clunk, and you take it to the mechanic, and the mechanic says, no, there's no clunk, there's no clunk, there's no clunk. Well, you keep driving and there's this clunk, and it annoys you. So you pull the car into your garage and you start disassembling the car looking for the clunk. And then in the end, you're left with pieces all over the ground. Well, the clunk's gone, but you can't drive your car anymore. And that, in some sense, is what people do with deconstruction. They're trying to figure out what's going wrong and why faith doesn't feel right, or why they don't have the connection to Jesus that they want, or why what they understand about Jesus or what the church is saying about Jesus doesn't really resonate with what they're trying to understand or experience. Now, it's true, there's just bad faith actors sometimes. But we're not loving and kind if we dismiss everyone with a problem as a bad faith actor. That's just leaning us back into, you need to pray it away and give it to God, don't tell me about it. Or, let me give you some apologetics and just shove this down your throat, right? Thank you for self-reporting your bug. Let me fix you. When instead, we might climb into the box they're in, look at its confines, and see how they perceive themselves in a place where they don't want to be. And then maybe figure out how to walk towards Jesus together. But this idea of deconstruction, it often is just like, just keep tearing it down and just keep tearing it down until all the pressure goes away. And if I keep rewriting the rules to the game until there's no game anymore, then I'm not really playing the sport, whatever that sport is, right? I can't really hit the ball well, so let's just not worry about strikes and balls. You can't continue to do that. So the principle is this: don't start taking things apart without trying to consider the problem first. And way early when we started this podcast, I told you I'm never going to talk about problems unless I'm also going to talk about solutions. And so when we reach a problem, we first have to have a goal. Am I trying to get to Jesus, or am I trying to experience something else? Am I trying to experience the Spirit? Am I trying to have spirituality? Am I trying to have a religion? Those things are not Jesus. I am just trying to get to Jesus. I just want Jesus. I want nothing else, and nothing less, nothing more, except all of Jesus in my life. If he could take over and live my life for me, but it doesn't work that way. But that's it. I just want 100% of Jesus. So when someone comes and says, hey, that's not Jesus, I'm willing to have a conversation and just use the basic rules of epistemology to go back and ask the question and do it from an intellectually honest position. So we have to have a goal, and we have to stick to the goal. As we're taking things apart, we can't notice something that perceives like another, maybe that's the problem, and get us sidetracked. We have to keep the goal, and we have to stick to the goal. And I'm trying to live like Jesus, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make my life better. I know that living like Jesus might take me to my cross. It might take me to my death. I might be like Bonhoeffer or others. Or I might be fortunate enough to live in the first world country that I do and actually increase my wealth somehow and have more to give away to others, whatever it is. I'm going to live like Jesus. It's Jesus or bust. So here's what happens when rigid meets questions. And no one knows how to be intellectually honest. I want you to look at this this other clip, and this is from this is the narrator in a clip. But many of these people, and I have more of them for you tomorrow. So if this is bumming you out, let me know, because I'm not trying to depress you, but I think it's worth listening to the narrator in this little chunk from this bit from Christianity Today. I Kissed Christianity Goodbye, a bonus episode on the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And this is, Joshua Harris, the author of that book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, actually apologized for all the people he hurt and kind of walked away from his faith. And listen to what this narrator says. I think he makes an excellent point. Oh, hold on. I know you guys want to actually hear it.
I don't think it's the mainstream evangelical experience. I think a lot of
all right, that was 30 seconds of dead air. Call me Dead Air Dave.
Who are now
Let's try it again.
Listen to those stories before they go about defending their doctrine. That we can grieve the pain and repent of the ways we've contributed to it. At the same time, I hope that those who've been hurt by the church can have a hunger for the truth as they go about their deconstruction. I spoke to Matthew Lee Anderson about this, a scholar of ethics and theology at Baylor University's Institute for the Studies of Religion, and author of The End of Our Exploring, a book about asking good questions in the search for truth.
They had a certain sort of experience of a community, and that experience was very bad. I don't think it's the mainstream evangelical experience. I think a lot of people who have experienced, who are now ex-evangelicals or who are reacting against this thing, had sociologically actually quite marginal experiences inside of evangelicalism. But, they were very bad experiences, and they're trying to make sense of that and finding people who can sympathize with them, who they can identify with, and that provides a certain sort of comfort and security for them. And I understand that, and I appreciate that. But that to me seems something very different than deep, difficult self-examination in order to find the truth, in the sense that there's a sort of quest for understanding the world and making sense of the world around us that I think gets corrupted once it takes this sort of publicized form, and when it takes a deliberately contrarian form, where what you're trying to do is actually critique and take down the structures that you've left behind.
To me, this raises an important question for those of us who might have deconstructing impulses at heart. What are we after? What's our motivating spirit? The contrast Matthew kept reinforcing in our conversation was the gap between a reactionary spirit that wants to reject the community of our youth and a spirit driven by the quest for truth, whatever it might cost to find it.
A spirit driven by the quest for truth, whatever it might cost to find it. I don't have a quest for truth. I have a quest for Jesus. I don't care. I don't have a stake in the game. He can be anything he is, because I'm not trying to tell him who he is. And so if I happen to get a point wrong, I don't care. I'm trying to change and conform my life to the Jesus of Scripture. So it's important for us then to consider where we're going. Now, I'm not necessarily going to be a big fan of deconstruction in that sense, and this is an older interview, but why does that happen? And you notice how he talks about when we set ourselves up against something. Rebellion is not a vision. We are not rebelling from evil as followers of Jesus. We are declaring the light. We're not going upstream. The current is shifting around us all the time. In a shifting current, if you're always trying to go against the current, you're just going to be going in circles. We fix a point on the horizon, and that point is Jesus, and then we head towards it. And when there's questions and problems, we stop and allow for those questions. But oftentimes what happens is we've set success to be such that all of us who start out on this journey towards Jesus together, we're all this big mob. And the trail guide is trying to make sure that the majority of the people get there. And so it's not really paying attention to why other people are wandering off to other trails. And it may be that others are wandering off because we're just slightly, there might need to make a left turn at Albuquerque or something. But we need to be able to be strong enough to consider something in our faith. And malleable. I have one more here video clip on this. And this is an interesting website. I've listened to a few of these guys' videos, and this is a pretty old one. Pretty interesting. He wrote a book that I'm probably going to read here in the near future about atonement. Anyway, but that's a whole different thing. Listen, but he's going to bring up a guitar player from Hillsongs and a post he made on Instagram many years ago. And I was going to play him, but, you know, I know we're going a bit long on the show. I want to make sure I don't drag on too much. So I'm just going to, and check out this guy's Church Split, his channel, his podcast. It seems pretty interesting. I'm curious about who he is and what he is, but I'm grateful he saved these screenshots so that, save the content here so that we can talk about what this, maybe I'll play the first little intro here where he tells us who this guy is.
Talk about this as a church, because this is a trend where we're seeing people follow these people as well. And if these people are going to be influencers, we need to address it when they say stuff like this. So anyway, I want to first talk about what he said specifically. So he posted this on Instagram. He said, "Time for some real talk. I'm genuinely losing my faith, and it doesn't bother me. How many preachers fall? Many. No one talks about it. How many miracles happen? Not many. No one talks about it. Why is the Bible full of contradictions? No one talks about it. How can God be love, yet send 4 billion people to a place all because they don't believe? No one talks about it." He then went on about how wonderful Christians were, about how some were so judgmental, and that he doesn't live his life for anyone else. He, of course, later deleted this Instagram post, but not before it accrued over 800 likes, which is kind of disturbing when you really think about it. He later clarified that he didn't renounce his faith, that this is on shaky ground, and I think that's important that we do address that. But he said this: "If most of humankind had a choice," this is in his clarification, Would we not rid the world of the scourge of cancer or sickness and disease? Why doesn't God do such a thing? Of course, there is an answer to this question, but the majority of a typical Christian's life is not spent considering these things, and that such questions are in the too hard basket. I
have continued to analyze the arguments of prominent Christian apologists and biblical scholars, and am open-minded enough to consider the arguments of atheists, debaters, and debaters from other religions. If the truth is true, it will remain so regardless of my understanding of it. If I search it out, surely it will become even more clearly seen as the truth that it is. Examining a diamond more closer reveals the quality of the diamond. As I'm still breathing, I am still learning. And so you see the good with the bad here. We see good arguments and bad arguments all kind of jumbled in together. Yes, we can examine and keep examining and keep asking questions, but what is your goal? Jesus or bust here. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me, so I'm going after Jesus. He's God incarnate. There is only one God in three persons, and Jesus is God, and he died and rose again, and he's it. He's everything, and he's the example for how we live. And that's why we call this a Jesus Followers podcast, because I'm just trying to follow after Jesus. And so then I have to deal with tough questions. And it should be normal to ask questions in our faith communities. And some of us try and normalize it in our faith communities, but what we do is we'll put a panel of experts up there and we'll say, bring your questions, and then we'll solve all their questions. And then we'll walk away going, we sure did a good thing. But we didn't really sit with anyone in their questions. We didn't sit with them in their struggle, and we didn't teach them how to wrestle with Jesus. And oftentimes the answers we give are trite, simplistic, or even word games, you know? So we can't handle questions because we're holding on to conclusions and not the quest. We're told to run the race, right? So I'm an imperfect person. I have misconceptions. This is this paradox of following Jesus. So I have to have some pathway to change, or I'm going to become rigid. And when I'm rigid, I'm not just codifying the good things where Jesus is transforming me. I'm codifying some of my misconceptions. And my misconceptions will rub up against people. And I can just dismiss that, like that Pink Floyd song, The Turning Away. I can just say, well, that's just a case of someone suffering, Or I can see that I am responsible for maybe some of the hurt that I cause others in my misconceptions through my lack of humility and my unwillingness to continue to transform and change and lean into a life of change and pursue Jesus. Here's the fundamental issue with why we don't have good conversations. We don't know how to answer the question of Jesus together. And when we don't know how to answer the question of Jesus together, we can't hear the questions because the questions challenge us and we don't have a way to resolve the tension of a good question. And so we say, well, isn't it great that we have all these apologists? Isn't it great that we have all these great thinkers? Why don't you go read them? Why don't you go look at them? Here's a book. Give it to God, not to me. And on that point, I want to go back to some of the claims that that guitar player from Hillsongs many years ago made, because it's the searching and the questing. It always seems to accompany these things, which are kind of misnomers, and these are not great arguments, but they're not great arguments that are propped up by our not great arguments. Okay? When someone says, yeah, that's a fake, and then they don't know why it's so everyone knows magicians are not really doing magic, they're doing illusions. Well, if you guess how a magician is doing a trick wrong, and your answer is wrong, that doesn't mean that you're not right, that he was still doing a trick. And so when we have bad explanations, people might not have a counter rebuttal that's accurate, but they can still somehow spot the fake. So one of these is the Bible has contradictions. And, this is the flimsy music stand. The Bible only has contradictions if you're not going to read it as ancient literature. If you're defining the Bible by our modern definition of precision. But then what we'll do is someone will say, well, the Bible has contradictions, and we'll say, nope, inerrancy, 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 and we'll come in and have all these overly precise, ridiculous explanations for things. Well, it says that, and then we appeal to our favorite verse, right? We'll go grab verses and we'll use them as like the mortar between the bricks as we build our own faith and not reconsider ourselves against the light of God's word and truth. And so what we do is, 2 Peter 3:8 is a favorite one for this, right? This is, we reach into our giant bag of spaghetti and we pull out a verse and we twist around the Bible. And so someone will say, hey, it seems like the earth and the universe is billions of years old, not thousands or tens of thousands. And, then we'll reach into our little Bible bag of tricks and we'll go, well, 2 Peter 3:8, a year is 1,000 days to the Lord, and 1,000 days is a year. So, and then, that's a ridiculous kind of way of reasoning with the conundrum, because it doesn't get rid of the problem. It just dismisses the person as a simpleton because they're not capable of doing word games the way we are. Or the same with, Revelation. Well, John says this is going to happen soon. Well, a year is 1,000 days to the Lord, and 1,000 days, and we can just take these magic verses and throw them over everything, and we stop reading the Bible for the literature that it is, and trying to understand what we're being told that is the truth of God, and we start using it as a tool to win arguments and shut down people's questions. But we're not giving them any real hope or answering their real question in any kind of a substantive way. What we're doing is just patching the bug. Oh, you've got a question? I'm going to put a patch on that and write a chunk of code. And when that problem comes back up, I'm still not going to figure out why. I'm just going to write a little patch into the code. In fact, NASA, in all their climate models, they were having a hard time perpetuating the ideology they wanted to perpetuate about climate change and things. And so they went back in and hard-coded their climate model to account for the exceptions in the data. Well, you don't worry about this one and exempt this from the model. That's the same kind of thing. So we don't want to do that. That's the overcomplicated, expensive music stand. And we don't want to be the cheap music stand, and we don't want to overcomplicate it. And so people are walking away because walking away is presented as just right? You don't even have to think about it, bro. You don't even have to worry about it. You just, you just kind of mourn your faith and you just move on. I read this book, and this book will break your heart if you're a follower of Jesus. When Art Disrupts Religion. This is a collection of memoirs from two groups of people. People who went to a very fundamentalist faith experience and people who went to a very liberal faith experience. One was all about the spirit and feeling and expression and things like that. And one was, Bob Jones is very fundamentalist. And these are memoirs of people who left their faith behind because of their faith experience. Because on one end, it was just answers with answers with answers with answers that just went in circles. And it was all about winning arguments. And it wasn't about really wrestling with problems. And the other one was all about experience, 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 experience. But at some point, there has to be some truth, and it has to be Jesus. And when we become rigid or cheap in how we deal with these issues, this is the kind of thing that we do. I'm going to read an excerpt from a poem. So this is from When Art Disrupts Religion, Aesthetic Experience in the Evangelical Mind. Philip Salem Francis is not a follower of Jesus. He has some kind of faith experience in his life or connection to faith culture. But this is not a book that promotes evangelicalism, and it's a book that'll break your heart. But it's an important one that I read because it's important to see how our bad ideas push people away from faith when they have honest questions and honest searching. And so Rebecca, who went to the more liberal experience, writes this poem. Shondella, she calls it. Sometimes when the band plays, my body forgets my long ago apostasy and swaps in reverence to a long gone God. My hands float free of gravity to praise the dead deity in a bar room full of people who don't notice that I've lost myself. In September, I watch the gold beauty, bittersweet and fleeting, through my closed car windows. The nights stretch frosted into the mornings, and I dread the long white silence that will bury us soon. So, in the closet, I dig out boxes of old scratchy tapes and play them loud in the car. Hymns to the God I no longer believe in. She goes on at the end. The strange, mystic syllables rise silently, sound themselves, and startle me. It's a reflex action, part of the tribal memory. I stare around and wonder, of what people am I? When we become so concerned, and it's not like these people who are walking away from their faith or deconstructing or doing this are meeting bad people. You know, John Piper's a good guy. So, and I don't know why his son's going through what he's going through. But things that aren't malleable in God's hands break. Evil uses arguments A and B, two bad music stands, the cheap one and the overcomplicated one, to make us think that there's this great third option. And there is a third option, but not the one that evil is proposing. And that third option always tends to look like self-worship, experientialism, worshiping our emotions, feeling like intellectuals when really our arguments are circular, or they're a rebuttal. And that goes back to that Christianity Today piece. The guy from Baylor was saying they've set themselves up to be against something. The way to handle our problems is to remind ourselves of the goal and to sit with our fellow brother or sister and to remind them of the goal. But listen, I know you're experiencing this problem, we say. I'm trying to find Jesus, and I want to find Jesus with you. And I know the rest of it might not make sense to us, but I'm going to still head towards Jesus. So I'm going to sit with you, and let's do this. And let's pursue Jesus together. Because the truth is, there is another option besides the cheap music stand and the overcomplicated one. But first we have to realize that A and B, it's just the lie and the perversion of the truth. And so Satan uses the lie and the perversion of the truth and pits them against each other in order to get us to some unpreferred place. A place where we can be spiritual, but it's not Jesus. Or a place where we walk away from faith altogether and try and become a moralistic atheist on some level. And it's like I said yesterday when I was talking about merit and works. Merit is not works. But what Satan would love us to do is compare grace and merit and call merit works, so that we don't do any good work, so that we don't do anything from Jesus. But Paul tells us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. We work out what God has placed in us. And to do work is not merit. It's not to say that I earned anything, because I didn't earn anything to receive the grace and love of Jesus. But that's something that he did for me. But work is not merit, right? And so it becomes this smoke and mirrors game. So other smoke and mirrors game, they turn Christianity into something it never was by turning the volume up on something that's already too loud. So we say, well, look, I'm just trying to follow the Spirit. And we crank that up to 11. And that overcrowds Jesus. And then evil comes along and says, well, you're trying to follow the Spirit? Well, if you're interested in following the Spirit, why do you need to worry about the Bible stuff? You know, just drop that and just go with the Spirit. The Spirit will guide you. And it just takes something that we've got a little bit wrong and makes us follow it even wronger. Even more wrong, right? And it gets rid of the contradictions that we experience when we confront Jesus. But if we're not going to bend, if our theology, if our doctrine, if our churches have no room to grow or to continue to be molded in God's hands, then they become rigid. And people bounce off and they get hurt. And so there's other twisting of definitions, like, defining Jesus as love instead of defining love as Jesus. And I would do the latter. The difference is if I define Jesus as love, then I can define love for whatever I want and put Jesus underneath that. If I define Jesus as love, then who am I to come along and claim to be more loving than God when I disagree with Jesus? Right? We do that so that we can shoehorn things into Jesus that aren't really Jesus. So we could keep going, but it's really all the same noise. We don't hear each other or provide space for questions. And we don't do that because we don't have healthy ways of wrestling with the question of Jesus. So those who wrestle often wrestle with people trying to undermine their faith, because they can't wrestle with us because they're either going to get dismissed or fixed. And we stop passing ourselves off as hypocrites on a path of transformation, because that's what we should be. That's what our church signs should read. Come watch us hypocrites try and undo our hypocrisy by following Jesus. Come watch us broken people try and be more like Jesus. And you're going to come up against our messiness, but we're still trying to pursue Jesus with everything we have. We've stopped passing ourselves off as hypocrites on a path to transformation, and we've started passing ourselves off as people with all of the answers. And so like I tell my church all the time, the closer you look at me, the more disappointed you're going to be, because I'm not Jesus. So don't look to me for answers, but let's fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. And let's run the race as if we're going to win the prize. Because in the end, all of this comes right back around to that same scam caller I got about credit cards. Credit cards that I don't have. And that's why we need to become people who know how to quest for Jesus. It's not that we have the answers, we sit on the answers, we protect the answers, and then we build walls up around the answers. And any argument that supports our answers will do. It's that we are people of the quest. We're people of the journey. So we need to figure out how to use the tools. And we need to be people that are known for daily shouting, I once was, but now I am. And that needs to be, yesterday I was, but today I am. And I hope tomorrow that I'm more like Jesus than I was today. So we can do this because we've got the goal. We fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. We live like Jesus. Whoever has faith in God should do what Christ did. And we just need to learn how to use a compass and how to read a map together. And those are skills that we can develop. And we need to open up the space so that that dialogue, and you see, the reason we don't have the dialogue is because we're afraid the dialogue is going to undo our quest, because we don't know how to search together. And that's what this podcast is about. How can we continue to lean in and search together and change and lean into God's transformational work in our life without losing our faith, without losing our mind, and without losing our way? God, if anyone is like me and listening to this, their heart is breaking for these people who've met fake answers and fake justifications. Jesus, you're beautiful. And if they only met the real you, God, help us be a people who change. Make us more like you. Amen. Listen, recap of the show. Don't fall for the bad options. Have conversations without fixing people, without trying to do a bug fix, and without trying to dismiss them. Really come to understand what they say, and then know how to quest. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. What are some of the broken ways that we try and read the Bible so that we end up missing its meaning instead of trusting its meaning? Because I don't go with these progressives that say, well, 1, 2, skip a few on the Bible. Man, that's everything we say about Jesus is ultimately going to come back to those 66 writings. And so I want to be a good student of the people that God sent to teach me about who Jesus is and why he is. And so we need to catch ourselves when we have bad ways of reading our scriptures. And we need to improve our capacity to read the scripture and understand what it means and to wrestle with it together in ways where we can increase our unity over who Jesus is without dismissing and leaving people behind. I'm really grateful that you're here. Mornings aren't my thing, but I get up because I'm grateful for you. And so if you do me a favor, if you do the social media things you like, you subscribe. And if you're not subscribed, do subscribe. That just helps break through the algorithm and things. And we're never going to be a paywall kind of show, but we might do some things just for subscribers, and subscribing is free. So some interaction stuff down the road. So subscribe, but mostly subscribe and share it, because when people have questions, I want us to be a strong people of faith I mean, imagine how wonderful it would be if instead of going to TikTok to talk about how they walked away from their faith, instead of having to write hymns to a God they never knew, if we could sit with them in their questions and they felt like they could be transparent with us and they could trust us and we could walk side by side with them towards Jesus together. Imagine how beautiful that would be. There's people we hurt all around because we become rigid, and we don't see them because they just kind of bounce off our faith. And I just that's not my heart. I know that's not your heart. So consider, if you want to increase the light that we shine, share this with someone who might be interested in doing something about the problem. All right, so I'll remind you my socials. Here at X, we're Take Up Your X. Facebook and Instagram is a Jesus Followers Podcast. Rumble is Jesus Follower Podcast, and YouTube is Jesus Follower Channel. Again, I'm really grateful you're here. We're here Tuesday through Friday, 5 a.m. Pacific, and you lucky East Coasters with the 8 a.m. time. Anyway, I'm really, really grateful you're here, and my hope is that today the light of Jesus would shine through you as you go about your day. Be well.
Yes, you now have a concert side table at the fabulous Blue Note, Madison near Dearborn, Chicago's Mecca for moderns, and for the people who play it that way. Currently, the Blue Note is featuring Count Basie, his famous piano, and his big new band. Yes, it's what you've been waiting for. It's Count Billy Basie, and here's the man himself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Count Basie and the band. Sincerely, you're going to enjoy. We hope you enjoy our little program, because we're going to have fun working for you. Now, in our first number, we featured Joe Newman on trumpet, Eddie Lockjaw Davis on tenor. A little thing we call the Blee Blop Blues.